Right, here we go. Let's have a think about the Normans. Okay, the Normans arrive, of course, in 1066, arguably the most significant date in English history. It's an invasion via foreign power. William the Conqueror defeats Harold Godwinson, of course, in 1066, and takes over England. Although he sees himself as the rightful heir to the English throne, he is a foreigner in a foreign land, a stranger in a strange land, if you like. And he's determined to show people who is boss, who's the new ruler of the country. One way in which he does this, of course, is to build hundreds of castles all over the UK to subdue the local population and to ensure that any opposition knows it will be treated very, very harshly. There are two trends in the Norman period. There's this trend of the power of the king is increasing and growing and becoming ever more dominant and harsher. And we can see why, because he wants to show his authority and show the English who is in control of their country now. Another trend running alongside this is the growth of the influence of the church in legal matters. And we'll talk about both of these things in a moment. Okay, the Normans come over. Again, because he sees himself as the rightful heir to the throne of England, he's not going to chuck out the Anglo system of law and order, but he does modify it. He keeps many aspects of it, but he does introduce some new aspects. One new thing he introduces is this brand new crime, killing a Norman. The very fact that they introduced this crime suggests that a lot of Normans were being killed by the English, and he had to introduce the law to try and stop that. So this is an example of a new law brought in by the Normans. And perhaps more importantly, there's a whole raft of laws that become known as the forest laws. England becomes the personal property of the king, and 30% of the land in England becomes the personal pleasure garden of the king. And the king loves to hunt, and 30% of English land becomes known as royal forests. And the forest laws punish anyone who would hunt the deer that live in the forest, but also anyone who would pick up sticks and branches and wood to use on their fire. And they're a terrible imposition on people who had formerly used the forest to supplement their livelihood or to use wood as fuel to go hunting. And the punishments for infringing the forest laws are very brutal, including blinding and even execution. So that's obviously a big development in law in England. Okay, how is the church having more of a say in the law? Church courts are set up, and their jurisdiction is over crimes that are considered moral crimes. Examples of moral crimes: adultery, having sex before you were married. These are considered offences against God, and so the church would deal with these particular crimes. By 1215, trial by ordeal is being phased out. However, the Normans introduced trial by battle, which has a similar logic or rationale behind it, except it's based on the notion that the victor in a battle must be innocent or on the rightful side of the law. What else is happening during the Norman period? There's this notion or idea of the Mund, M-U-N-D, which is supposedly an area around your home which should be lawful and peaceful, and you should have the right to have an area around your home. And the king's Mund is the whole country. It's this notion that the king has the right to protect the whole country, and you as a homeowner have the right to protect the surrounding area around your home. The big noticeable punishment change during this period is that punishments become much harsher and are used much more frequently. We see a huge rise in the amount of people who are executed, primarily by hanging, but also by beheading. Again, this ties in with the notion that the king is desperately trying to subdue or suppress anyone who would dare revolt against his regime and his authority. And as a result of the king's greater influence, at the same time you see a diminishing in the use of were-gild and bot-gild, which is compensation to victims of crime. That goes out of the window. Now you compensate the king if you do something wrong. Church influence is growing, as I said earlier. Two examples of that. First one is this notion of benefit of clergy. if you can pretend to read the Bible, no, if you can read the Bible, that is proof positive that you are a member of the clergy, you are a priest, and so therefore you should be tried for whichever crime you're accused of by the church courts. Of course, some people cottoned on to the fact that the church courts were much more lenient than the royal courts. So some people learned passages from the Bible by rote, by memory, and pretended to read something from the Bible when they were questioned. And sometimes they just they held the Bible upside down, but they managed to say something and somehow convince the authorities that they should be put in front of a church court. Another example of the greater influence of the church in law is this idea or notion of sanctuary. If you can get yourself to a cathedral or a church, the law is not allowed to pursue you. The sheriff, the constable, the posse itself is not allowed to pursue you into the church. And if you stay there long enough and you confess to your crime, the church will give you the punishment of being exiled, which I suppose is a better bet than being executed. So the big trends are growing influence of the king, much more use of harsher punishments, and the growing influence of the church. Quick reminder, have a look at this. There you go, that's the Normans.